Clown Chronicles, battling the shadows of fear. Welcome to the hashtag Horror Haven, your one-stop shop for terrifying clown merchandise. Step into a world where fear and suspense come to life at our spine-chilling store. As you enter hashtag Horror Haven, be prepared to face your deepest nightmares and encounter your worst fears. Our store is dedicated to all things clown-related, providing a wide range of products that will give you an adrenaline rush like never before. This story is about the horror of clowns. Ha, 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 ha. Believe me when I say, you will be terrified. Comment now if you hate or are afraid of clowns. Enjoy. There was something inherently terrifying about clowns, with their painted-on grins and oversized shoes. For Emily, it all began with an innocent visit to the circus with her family. She was only 6 at the time, but she still vividly remembered the way those clowns had made her skin crawl. Their fake laughter had echoed through the tent, and their exaggerated movements had seemed almost grotesque in the garish light. From that day onward, Emily had been absolutely terrified of clowns. As she grew older, her phobia only intensified. She avoided circuses and carnivals like the plague, and would break out in a sweat at the sight of anyone in clown makeup. But despite her fear, Emily had always been drawn to the stories of the infamous clown gangs that roamed the streets of the city. She had heard all the legends about their ruthless tactics and their insatiable hunger for chaos. They were supposed to be a thing of the past, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, lurking in the shadows. One night, Emily found herself walking home from work after a late shift. The city was eerily quiet, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She turned a corner and suddenly found herself confronted by a group of clowns. They wore oversized shoes and bright red noses, but their faces were twisted into grotesque masks of glee. Emily's heart began to race in her chest as she backed away. "What do you want?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The clowns didn't answer. Instead, they began to advance on her, their eyes glittering with malice. Emily turned and ran, her heart thudding in her chest as she tried to put as much distance between her and the clowns as possible. But she soon realized that they were faster than her, their long legs propelling them forward in a way that was almost inhuman. She ducked into an alleyway, hoping to lose them, but knew deep down that it was a futile effort. As she crouched behind a dumpster, she heard their footsteps growing closer and closer. "Come on out and play. We won't hurt you," one of the clowns called, his voice high-pitched and grating. "We won't hurt you much." Emily could feel her pulse pounding in her temples as she clutched her phone tightly, contemplating whether to call the police. But before she could make a decision, the clowns had caught up to her. She screamed as they descended upon her, their hands grabbing at her hair and clothes as she tried to fight them off. The smell of grease paint filled her nostrils as she struggled to break free, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked for a way out. Then, out of nowhere, a figure appeared in the alleyway. Emily could barely make him out in the dim light, but she could see that he was wearing a clown mask of his own. The clowns backed away from him, their eyes widening in surprise. "What are you doing here?" one of them asked, his voice trembling slightly. The figure didn't reply. Instead, he reached behind his back and pulled out a knife. Emily gasped as she watched the figure lunge forward, slicing at the clowns with a terrifying efficiency. The clowns fought back, but they were no match for this mysterious attacker. Within minutes, they lay in a heap on the ground, blood pooling around their bodies. Emily backed away, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The figure stepped forward, removing his mask to reveal a handsome, rugged face. "Hey there," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You okay?" Emily couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. The man offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "Let's get you out of here," he said, leading her out of the alleyway. As they emerged onto the street, Emily couldn't believe what she was seeing. The city was in chaos, with clowns running wild in the streets and wreaking havoc wherever they went. But the man seemed completely unfazed. He led Emily through the madness, his hand warm and reassuring in hers. As they walked, Emily felt a growing sense of trust in the stranger. She didn't know who he was, but there was something about him that made her feel safe. But just as that feeling began to take hold, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold. It was the sound of laughter. The same fake, exaggerated laughter that had haunted her ever since that fateful day at the circus. Emily turned to face the noise, her heart pounding in her chest. And there, in front of her, was a clown. But it was unlike any clown she had ever seen. Its skin was pallid and dead-looking, and its eyes glowed with an unearthly light. Its mouth was twisted into a grotesque grin that seemed to stretch from ear to ear. Emily felt her stomach turn as the clown began to shamble towards her, its fingers reaching out to grab her. But the man stood firm, his knife held out in front of him as he blocked the clown's path. It lunged forward, its fingers gnarled and claw-like as it tried to grab at Emily's face. But the man was too quick. He stabbed at the clown's heart, and it fell to the ground with a final, gurgling breath. Emily watched in stunned silence as the man wiped his blade clean before stepping forward to take her hand once more. "Let's go," he said softly, leading her away from the chaos. Emily didn't know what to think. The man had saved her life, but there was something about him that seemed almost inhuman. But as they walked through the city, Emily began to see something that made her realize that there was more to this situation than she had first thought. The man seemed to have a strange power over the clowns wherever he walked. They scrambled away, their grins twisted in fear. Emily didn't know how or why, but somehow this man had become a sort of legend among them. And as they walked, Emily began to see that there was a much bigger story at play here, one that was far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. As she walked hand in hand with the man, Emily knew that she had stumbled into something that was far beyond her control. But she couldn't help feeling a strange sense of exhilaration after all. She had always been drawn to the things that scared her the most. And in the end, she knew that she wouldn't be able to resist the pull of the unknown for long. She just hoped that she would be able to survive long enough to see where it all led. But deep down, Emily knew that the horrors that awaited her were far beyond anything she had ever imagined. As she walked further into the city with the man, Emily began to realize that he was more than just a random stranger who had saved her life. He seemed to know things that no one else did, and as they walked through the streets, Emily couldn't help but feel like she was being led down a path that she wasn't entirely comfortable with. As they walked, Emily noticed that the city had grown even darker. The streetlights flickered ominously, casting deep shadows over everything around them. The sounds of laughter and screams echoed through the alleyways, making Emily's heart race with terror. But the man seemed unfazed. He walked with an easy, confident stride, his hand firm in hers. "Who are you?" Emily finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man turned to her, his eyes dark and intense. "I'm a hunter," he said simply. "I hunt things that go bump in the night." Emily's mind rebelled against the idea. It was too insane to believe. But as they continued walking, she realized that the man seemed to have a supernatural sense of where the clowns were and how to avoid their traps. It was as though he was one of them, but not quite, a sort of in-between creature that straddled the line between human and monster. As they walked through the city, Emily began to notice that the clowns seemed to be growing more agitated. Their laughter was growing louder and more manic, and Emily realized that they were closing in on them quickly. The man seemed to sense it too. He drew his knife and held it out in front of him, ready to defend himself and Emily from whatever was coming. But as they turned another corner, they saw something that made Emily's blood run cold. It was a group of clowns, more than Emily had ever seen before. There must have been dozens of them, all with painted-on grins and twisted, inhuman faces. And in the center of the group was a figure that made Emily's heart freeze. It was a clown that stood taller than the others, with a pale white face and a red nose that glowed in the dim light. Emily could sense that this was the leader of the gang, the one who was responsible for all the chaos and destruction in the city. The man could sense it too. He gripped Emily's hand tightly and began backing away slowly. But the clowns had already spotted them, and as they began to advance, Emily knew that they were in for the fight of their lives. The man fought with a ferocity that Emily had never seen before, moving with a quickness and precision that seemed almost inhuman. He sliced his knife through the air, cutting through the clowns as though they were made of paper. But despite his efforts, they just kept coming. Their numbers were too great, and they seemed to be gaining strength with each passing moment. As the battle wore on, Emily began to fear that they would be overtaken, that she and the man would become just another set of victims on the clown gang's list. But just as things seemed their bleakest, something miraculous happened. The clowns began to retreat. Emily couldn't see it, but she knew that the leader of the gang had disappeared, taking the clowns with him. And just like that, the city was quiet once again. As they walked back to Emily's apartment, the man didn't say much. Emily didn't know what to ask. There were too many questions swirling around in her mind. Who was this man? How had he survived in a world overrun by clowns? As they reached Emily's front door, the man turned to her, his eyes intense. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "The clowns will keep coming. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything." Emily nodded, her heart heavy with dread. "I know," she said softly. "But what can we do?" The man shrugged, his eyes darkening. "We can keep fighting," he said simply. And with that, he disappeared into the night, leaving Emily alone with her thoughts and her fears. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: the clowns were still out there, and they weren't going to rest until they had taken everything that was important to Emily. But somehow, with the man's help, Emily knew that she could keep fighting, that she could face the terror that lay ahead, and win the ultimate victory in this war of the clowns. Subscribe to hear more of the Clown Chronicles. Thank you for listening. Until next time.